Let me start with something that might surprise you. India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act, the DPDP Act, was passed back in 2023, and compliance deadlines are now closing in fast. Yet, recent industry surveys suggest that a large majority of Indian companies still have not even begun their compliance journey. Think about that for a second. One of the biggest privacy laws to ever hit Indian businesses, and most organizations are treating it like a problem for next quarter, hoping it will somehow sort itself out. So, why does this matter to you? Maybe you are a compliance professional, a product manager, or someone building the next big app in India. Whatever your role, by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what the DPDP Act requires, who it applies to, and why getting ahead of it now could save your organization from painful penalties later. We will walk through key definitions like data principal and data fiduciary, unpack the consent rules, look at the rights individuals now have over their data, and finish with penalties and compliance steps. Think of this as your 10-minute crash course, the one you wish someone had given you before the deadlines started piling up. Ready? Let's get into it. Now let's talk definitions, because honestly, half the confusion around DPDP comes from people mixing up basic terms. So let's break it down in simple words. A data principal is simply the individual whose personal data is being collected. That's you, me, anyone whose name, phone number, or email sits in someone else's database. A data fiduciary is the organization that decides why and how that data gets processed. Think of your bank, your favorite shopping app, or the hospital that holds your medical records. Here's an analogy that helps. Imagine you hand over your house keys to a trusted neighbor while you travel. You are still the owner, the principal, but the neighbor, the fiduciary, now has responsibility for how those keys are used. If they misuse them, they are accountable, not you. And what counts as personal data under this law? It's any data that can identify a person directly or indirectly, digital only under DPDP, so your name, biometric data, or even a device ID. When I was reviewing a fintech client's data flow last year, we realized their vendor was quietly acting as a fiduciary without anyone formally defining that role. That gap alone could have triggered a compliance violation. So ask yourself, in your organization, do you clearly know who your fiduciaries and processors are? That clarity is where real compliance begins. Let's move to obligations and consent, because this is where the DPDP Act really has teeth. Every data fiduciary has to follow certain core obligations, and consent sits right at the center of it all. But here's the thing. This isn't the old-style consent where a company buries permission inside 20 pages of legal jargon and hopes you never read it. Under DPDP, consent has to be free, specific, informed, unconditional, and unambiguous. Think about the last time you installed a new app and it asked for your contacts, location, and camera access all at once with one vague checkbox. That kind of bundled consent is exactly what this law is trying to eliminate. Each purpose now needs its own clear ask. I remember working with an edtech company that had to redesign their entire sign-up flow because their single consent checkbox covered 5 different uses of student data. We had to break it into individual plain language prompts. It was painful initially, but it actually built more trust with parents. Beyond consent, fiduciaries must also implement reasonable security safeguards, notify the board and affected individuals in case of a breach, and delete personal data once its purpose is fulfilled. So ask yourself, does your organization still treat consent as a formality or as an ongoing conversation with your users? Under DPDP, it has to be the latter. Now here's a part of the law that genuinely shifts power back to individuals: the rights of the data principal. Under DPDP, you as an individual are not just a passive subject whose data floats around in someone else's system. You have real, enforceable rights. First, the right to access information. You can ask a fiduciary what data they hold about you and how it's being used. Second, the right to correction and erasure. If your data is wrong or outdated, you can demand it be fixed or deleted. Third, the right to grievance redressal, meaning every fiduciary must have a way for you to raise complaints. And fourth, the right to nominate someone who can exercise these rights on your behalf if you become incapacitated or pass away. Think of it like this. Imagine discovering an old employer still has your salary details 3 years after you left with no valid reason. Under DPDP, you can walk up and say, delete this, and they are legally bound to respond. I once helped a healthcare startup build a simple rights request portal. And what surprised the founders most was how many users actually used it within the first month. People do care once they know they have a voice. So here's a question worth sitting with. If a user asked your organization today to erase their data, how quickly and smoothly could you actually do it? Let's close the loop with penalties, because this is usually the part that gets everyone's attention. The DPDP Act allows fines of up to 250 crore rupees for serious violations. And these are decided by a newly formed Data Protection Board of India, which acts almost like a specialized privacy court. Unlike GDPR, there's no revenue-linked cap here, so even smaller companies can face steep penalties if they mishandle data. Here's a question worth asking yourself. If the board knocked on your organization's door tomorrow, could you show a documented consent trail, a breach response plan, and a grievance mechanism? If the honest answer is no, you are not alone, but you are also not compliant. So where do you start? Map your data flows, identify every fiduciary and processor relationship, rebuild your consent mechanisms, and set up a simple grievance redressal process. These aren't massive overnight projects. They are structured, sequential steps. Now, if you are looking for a detailed, structured course on this topic, complete with role plays, quizzes, and practice tests, our DPDP Act 2023 Compliance Masterclass on Udemy walks you through every one of these steps in depth. And the link is right there in the description. Also, hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this series, and check out our DPDP Act Master Series playlist linked below for more deep dives on this law.